Her true story from Texas. My son locked me in a freezer for hours, but I'm the one who decides his fate. They look at this old woman at the web of wrinkles etched deep upon my face and dismiss my words as the ramblings of a mind slowly surrendering to the twilight. But let them. The scars that truly define me are not the ones they can see. Victoria Kane's voice was steady as she spoke, though the weight of years and betrayal sat heavily on her shoulders. She was 70 now, the matriarch of Kane Biotech Foods, a company she had built from the ground up in Boston. Her life's work had been about feeding people, safely, cleanly, using science not to dominate nature, but to preserve it. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about food science or quarterly earnings. She was thinking about survival. Victoria had always been a pioneer. Long before organic was trendy, she had seen the potential of blending biotech with natural farming. The result was Kane Biotech Foods, a billion-dollar empire with warehouses, research labs, and contracts spanning the globe. Yet, as her empire grew, so did the cracks in her family. Her son, Jason Kane, was supposed to be her successor. Polished, charming, and ambitious, he had worked his way up to become the chief financial officer. To outsiders, Jason was the dutiful son, the heir apparent, the man who would carry Kane Biotech Foods into the future. But Victoria knew the truth. Behind the tailored suits and gleaming smile, Jason had been quietly siphoning money for years. His debts from failed ventures and lavish spending were threatening to sink not just him, but the very company her mother had built. And now she feared he was capable of something far worse. It was supposed to just be another inspection. Victoria and Priya Desai, her loyal operations manager, were touring the company's R&D storage facility outside Boston, a place where temperature-sensitive compounds were kept in industrial cold rooms. The corridors smelled faintly sterile, lined with heavy steel doors and humming compressors. Priya had been talking Victoria through new storage protocols when Jason appeared, all smiles and politeness. "Mother, Priya, come inside. I want to show you something." The women stepped into the cold storage unit, their breaths frosting instantly in the sub-zero air. Victoria turned to ask what they were meant to see when the heavy door slammed shut behind them. For a moment, she thought it was an accident. Then she heard the unmistakable click of the lock. Panic rose. She pounded the steel with her fist, shouting Jason's name. No answer came, only the dull hum of refrigeration coils. The temperature inside was dropping, fast. The cold cut through them in waves. Priya rubbed her arms desperately, her lips turning blue. She whispered, "We need to conserve heat." Victoria, with a survivor's instinct, began scanning the room. There were crates of insulated packaging, cardboard boxes, sheets of industrial plastic. She pulled them together, fashioning crude layers of insulation. They huddled in a corner, wrapping themselves as best they could. Every breath felt like knives in her chest, but Victoria forced herself to stay calm. "We are not dying here, not like this." Hours dragged by. Their fingers stiffened, their skin burned from frostbite, but they clung to life. Somewhere in the darkness of her mind, Victoria realized the truth. Her son had put her here. The boy she had raised, the man she had trusted with her life's work, had chosen greed over blood. And in that freezer, Victoria Kane made a vow. If she lived, she would not rest until Jason was exposed. When the freezer door finally opened, it wasn't Jason who appeared. It was a pair of night shift workers responding to a tripped alarm in the cold storage system. They found Victoria and Priya barely conscious, their skin pale, lips blue, bodies trembling violently as hypothermia took its grip. Emergency services rushed them to Massachusetts General Hospital. The next hours blurred into a haze of flashing lights, IV drips, and the warmth of heated blankets. Doctors marveled that 2 women of their age and exposure had survived at all. Jason Kane arrived at the hospital with the polished face of concern. He clasped reporters' hands, shook his head gravely, and spoke about his mother's brush with death. Cameras captured him at her bedside, gently adjusting her blanket, whispering for her to stay strong. To the public eye, he was a son heartbroken, praying for her recovery. To Victoria, lying under a tangle of wires and monitors, it was theater. She saw the calculation behind his eyes. The man who had locked her in a freezer was now playing the role of savior, building alibis with every photo op. And for now, she had no proof, only survival. It happened late one night when the cameras were gone and the nurses had left her to rest. Jason leaned close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You should have died in there," he whispered, the smile never leaving his lips. "Now you keep quiet, because if you don't, Mother, next time I'll make sure there isn't a rescue." The room felt colder than the freezer had. Victoria's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She only gave a frail smile, nodding as though in confused compliance. In that moment, she made her choice. She would not confront Jason directly, not yet. She would play the part of the fragile old woman, let him believe she was broken, and all the while she would gather proof. Her recovery was slow, but in the quiet weeks that followed, she reached out in secret. Her godson, Tyler Brooks, a corporate lawyer in Boston, was summoned under the pretense of discussing her will. Instead, she laid bare her suspicion. Jason was embezzling, covering his tracks, and now had tried to kill her. Tyler believed her. Together, they agreed, caution with survival. Jason must not suspect they were building a case. Meanwhile, Jason polished his public persona. He donated to charities in his mother's name. He reassured investors that Kane Biotech Foods was thriving. He visited Victoria daily, kissing her forehead, telling nurses she was the strongest woman he knew. But every so often, he leaned close to remind her who held power. One slip, and everyone will think you've gone senile. Who would they believe, the devoted son or the paranoid old woman? Victoria let him think she was beaten. It was the role of a lifetime, and she intended to play it to perfection. When Priya was discharged from the hospital, she had her moved to a secure residence under Tyler's protection. Together, they began to piece together what Jason had done: missing funds, suspicious contracts, unexplained transfers. It would be a long game. Evidence had to be airtight, proof undeniable. Until then, silence was survival. Victoria Kane, dismissed by some as an old woman fading into twilight, was sharpening her mind like a blade. And one day, she would use it.
So here we are. Victoria has survived the cold, but now she faces something far deadlier. A son who wears the mask of devotion by day and whispers threats by night. And if you've stayed with her story this far, that means you care more than most. You didn't look away. You didn't dismiss her as just another old woman. You've stood with her in the freezer, through the hospital, through fear. Do her justice. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment she finally turns the tables. You've kept her alive in memory just by watching. But the question is, can Victoria outsmart Jason before he strikes again? The weeks after her release from the hospital felt strangely quiet for Victoria Kane. Outwardly, she returned to the role of the frail matriarch, smiling at Jason's staged visits, nodding obediently when doctors spoke as if she were fragile glass. But beneath the surface, her mind was sharper than it had been in years. Survival had rekindled something in her, a fire that Jason thought had gone out. He saw wrinkles and fragility. She saw an opportunity. Victoria began with whispers. Quiet meetings in her home library with Tyler Brooks, her godson and trusted lawyer, and Priya Desai, still shaken from the freezer ordeal but determined to help. The three of them formed a pact to build a case so strong that Jason's carefully polished image would collapse under its weight. But they had to move like shadows. One misstep, and Jason would know. "I can't confront him directly," Victoria whispered one night, her voice hoarse from the strain of secrecy. "We need to know how he's moving the money and where. Otherwise, it's just my word against his." Tyler nodded. "Then we start with the ledgers, the contracts, anything with his signature. If he's covering his tracks, he's made mistakes somewhere." Priya had quietly copied internal reports during her last weeks in the company. She spread them across Victoria's dining table like puzzle pieces. "There," she said, pointing at an invoice for a biotech supply company in Providence. "This supplier doesn't exist. I checked." Tyler leaned forward, scanning the document. "And look at the transfer details. The same shell company pops up again. MR Holdings, LLC. One fake invoice became two. Two became five. Soon a picture emerged. Jason was funneling millions through dummy suppliers and shell accounts, bleeding Kane Biotech Foods from the inside. Victoria's jaw tightened. "He didn't just try to kill me. He's been trying to kill the company all along." Meanwhile, Jason's public mask grew brighter. He threw charity dinners in Victoria's honor. He gave interviews about his mother's miraculous recovery and the future of Kane Biotech in his stewardship. Investors ate it up. Newspapers printed glowing profiles. To the outside world, Jason Kane was a modern prince, guiding a biotech empire into a new era. But behind the curtain, he grew more controlling. He monitored staff emails. He replaced long-trusted managers with loyalists. Anyone who questioned a financial decision found themselves quietly dismissed. Priya, who had once been a senior operations manager, had already been pushed out. "He's cleaning the house," she warned Victoria. "If he thinks you're watching him, we'll all be next." For Victoria, every interaction with Jason became a test. She played the role of the doting, confused mother, smiling weakly, pretending to forget details, letting him believe she was slipping into harmless old age. But inside, her resolve hardened. "You'll handle it, Jason," she thought, "and when you fall, you'll fall hard." Tyler moved carefully, enlisting a retired accountant named David Morales to comb through old records. David had no ties to the company anymore, no reason to be suspected.
Weeks of painstaking review uncovered shocking numbers. Nearly 40% of the company's assets had been siphoned into offshore accounts, funneled through layers of shell companies with Jason's fingerprints all over them. The evidence was building, but they needed one last piece, proof that Jason wasn't just stealing, but that he had orchestrated the freezer accident. That would be the nail in the coffin. Priya came through. She had secretly recorded conversations in the hospital, moments when Jason's mask slipped. In one, his voice was unmistakable. "You should have died in that freezer. Next time,
you will."
Victoria listened to the recording in silence, the words echoing like knives. When it ended, she closed her eyes. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the proof we needed." Tyler leaned back, exhaling. "With this, the fraud, and the transfers, we can bury him. But we need to strike at the right moment, when he won't see it coming." They decided the perfect place was the next board meeting. Jason thrived in those rooms, surrounded by directors and investors who believed every word he said. To expose him there would shatter his illusion publicly and permanently. Victoria would attend, frail but resolute. And when the moment came, she would let the evidence speak for itself. The thought of facing Jason again chilled her, but she reminded herself of the vow she made in that freezer. If she lived, she would not rest until justice was done. So now the stage is set. The silent investigation has uncovered Jason's fraud, his shell companies, even his own whispered confession. But exposing him will mean stepping into his territory, the boardroom, where he still wears the crown. And here's where you come in. If you've made it this far, you've already proven you're not just a casual viewer. You're part of the few who stand beside Victoria in the shadows, who know the truth before the world does. When the moment comes, will Victoria's courage and evidence be enough to bring Jason down? The mahogany-paneled boardroom of Kane Biotech Foods gleamed under the glow of recessed lights. Rows of leather chairs curved around a long polished table, the smell of strong coffee mixing with the faint tang of new paper. For years, this room had been Victoria Kane's throne, the place where she guided her company through storms, wars, and expansions. But now at 70, she entered the room not as the presiding queen, but as a woman underestimated, written off by whispers of frailty, dismissed as slipping. Jason had carefully nurtured that narrative. He let him. His cane tapped softly on the hardwood floor. She made her way to her seat. Her movements were slow but deliberate, her face a mask of quiet resignation. The directors rose politely, murmuring greetings. Jason hovered beside her like a dutiful son, placing a steadying hand on her chair. "Mother insisted on joining us today, but don't worry, I'll handle the details. She just wanted to observe." Polite nods all around. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? Jason Kane was the polished face of the company now, a man who had saved them from worrying about a fragile old woman still clinging to relevance. Victoria's lips curved into the faintest smile. Let them underestimate her. It was exactly what she wanted. Jason began his presentation with the confidence of a man who believed the stage was his. Charts flashed on the wall-mounted screen, graphs showing growth, projections soaring skyward. "Under my stewardship," he declared, "Kane Biotech Foods has not only stabilized, but is poised to double its market share in the next 3 years. Our investors can rest easy knowing the transition of leadership is secure." He gestured toward Victoria. "And of course, this wouldn't be possible without my mother's vision. We honor her legacy every day." The directors clapped politely. Jason basked in it, his smile broad and triumphant. To anyone else, he looked like the future. But to Victoria, who had listened to him whisper murder at her bedside, he looked like a viper coiled and ready to strike. When Jason concluded, Victoria placed her hands flat on the table. The cane beside her rattled slightly as she rose to her feet. The room hushed. "Before we move on," she said softly, "I have something to share." Jason's eyes flickered. For the briefest moment, his smile faltered. "Mother, perhaps now isn't—" She raised her hand, silencing him with a gesture she had used when he was a boy. "Sit down, Jason. It's my turn." The room went still. Victoria nodded to Tyler Brooks, seated discreetly at the far end of the table. He stood, carrying a slim laptop. With a click, the projector screen changed. The smiling charts disappeared. In their place appeared rows of invoices, contracts, and bank transfers. Over the past 3 years, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength with every word, nearly 40% of Kane Biotech Foods' assets had been siphoned into offshore accounts controlled by my son. Gasps echoed. Board members leaned forward, their expressions tightening as the numbers came into focus. Tyler clicked again. A web of connections appeared. MR Holdings, Providence Supply, New Tech Ventures, all dummy corporations Jason had used. Lines connected them like a spider's web, all leading back to him. Every invoice you approved, every contract you trusted was a forgery, signed with my son's hand. The man you thought was saving this company has been bleeding it dry. Jason laughed nervously. Mother, this is absurd. These are doctored. But his voice cracked, betraying him. Doctored? Then explain this. She nodded again. Tyler played the recording Priya had captured in the hospital. Jason's voice filled the boardroom, cold and unmistakable. You should have died in that freezer. Next time, you will. The room erupted. Directors turned to one another in shock, their eyes darting between Jason and Victoria. Jason's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened. Sheriff Thompson, flanked by 2 deputies, entered. Behind him came a suited representative from the district attorney's office and another from the IRS. Apologies for the interruption, the sheriff said, his voice steady. We're here to serve arrest warrants.
He unfolded a document, his gaze locking on Jason. Jason Kane, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The room froze. Jason staggered back, his chair toppling over with a crash. This is a mistake, he shouted. I built this company. You'll regret this. The deputies moved swiftly, cuffing his wrists. His polished facade crumbled, replaced by rage and panic. Victoria stood tall, her cane steady beneath her hand, her eyes unflinching. As Jason was dragged from the room, the board sat in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the directors, a man who had long sided with Jason, cleared his throat. Madam Kane, we didn't know. We should have listened. Victoria's expression softened, though her heart was still pounding. You believe the image he sold you. That's what greed does. It blinds us. But now the truth is out, and this company will not die at his hands. She sank back into her chair, her body heavy, but her spirit blazing. She had kept her vow. She had faced her betrayer in his own arena and emerged victorious. Later that evening, in the quiet of her study, Victoria allowed herself a rare moment of exhaustion. Tyler poured her a glass of water. Priya sat close by, and for the first time in weeks, the weight lifted. Still, questions remained. How much of the stolen money could be recovered? Would the company survive the fallout? And most haunting of all, had she truly seen the last of Jason's schemes? She knew one thing, the scars of betrayal would remain, but she had shown the world, and herself, that she was not just a fading matriarch. She was still the founder, still the fighter. The ambush is complete. Jason has been unmasked, arrested in front of the very board he thought he controlled. But for Victoria Kane, justice is only the beginning. The company must heal, the losses must be recovered, and the wounds of betrayal will take longer to mend than any financial ledger. The question now is, with Jason gone, can Victoria rebuild what he nearly destroyed? Or will the empire she built crumble under the weight of betrayal?
The echo of Jason's arrest still lingered in Victoria Kane's mind long after the boardroom emptied. For hours, her phone buzzed with calls, directors, investors, reporters, all scrambling to make sense of the scandal. Kane Biotech Foods, once seen as an untouchable empire, had been thrust into the glare of public shame. But for Victoria, None of that mattered in the moment. What mattered was this. She had lived to see her betrayer exposed. Her vow in the freezer had been fulfilled. Yet, victory did not feel clean. The next morning, Boston's newspapers ran the story in bold print. Jason Kane arrested for fraud and attempted murder of company founder. Reporters camped outside the Kane estate. Cameras clicked as Victoria, flanked by Tyler Brooks and Priya Desai, walked slowly to her waiting car. She ignored the shouted questions. Her silence was its own statement. Inside the car, Priya whispered, "It's over, Victoria. He can't hurt you anymore." But Victoria knew better. The wounds of betrayal were not so easily cauterized. Jason was her son. No matter how monstrous his actions, he was still the boy she had once held, once dreamed would inherit her legacy. That knowledge cut deeper than frostbite. The months that followed were a blur of hearings and legal battles. Prosecutors built their case with meticulous precision. The recordings Priya had captured, the falsified contracts, the transfers through MR Holdings, each piece fit together into a damning puzzle. Jason's defense team argued desperation, claiming he had been driven by mounting debts and poor judgment. They painted him as a man overwhelmed, not malicious. But the evidence was overwhelming. In court, Victoria sat through it all, her face a mask of dignity. She listened as her own son's voice was played to the jury. "You should have died in that freezer." Gasps filled the courtroom. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his polished facade finally stripped away. When the verdict came, it was clear. Guilty on all counts. Embezzlement, fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. Jason Kane was sentenced to decades in federal prison. But justice in the courts was only half the battle. Kane Biotech Foods had been gutted, nearly 40% of its assets siphoned away during Jason's reign. The company teetered on the edge of collapse. Investors pulled back, creditors circled like vultures, analysts predicted bankruptcy within the year. But Victoria refused to let her life's work die with Jason's betrayal. With Tyler's legal expertise and Priya's operational knowledge, she launched a massive restructuring. Redundant projects were cut, partnerships were renegotiated, and most importantly, she made a bold public appeal. At a press conference broadcast nationwide, Victoria stood before the cameras, frail but resolute. "My son betrayed this company, but Kane Biotech Foods is bigger than one man's greed. It was built on integrity, on innovation, and on the promise that food can sustain life. That promise has not been broken." Her words struck a chord. Slowly, trust began to return. Investors who had fled cautiously re-engaged, community partners rallied, employees once fearful found pride in standing with her. The company survived. But survival did not erase the deeper wound, the wound of a mother whose child had tried to destroy her. Late at night, Victoria would sit alone in her study, staring at old photographs. Jason as a boy clutching a model airplane. Jason at 16 grinning at his first driving lesson. Jason in his 20s shaking hands at his first company gala. She whispered to those photos sometimes, her voice breaking. "Why, Jason? Why wasn't my love enough?" There was no answer, only silence. Priya and Tyler tried to console her, but some pains are beyond the reach of comfort. Betrayal by a stranger wounds. Betrayal by blood scars the soul. One spring morning, months after the trial, Victoria found herself on the porch of her Boston home. A delivery had been left at her door, a small blue cooler filled with samples from the company's new product line. She ran her fingers over its cold plastic surface, and for a moment, she was back in the freezer. The suffocating cold, the sound of the door slamming shut, the taste of betrayal. But this time, she didn't shiver. She smiled. That cooler, once a symbol of death, had become something else. A reminder, a promise. Justice, she thought, had been served as cold as the freezer her son had left her in. Years later, as Kane Biotech Foods stabilized and even grew, Victoria began to step back. She appointed Priya as CEO, a woman whose loyalty had been tested in ice and fire. Tyler remained as legal counsel, ensuring the company stayed clear of shadows. Victoria remained the heart of the company, but not its hands. Her legacy had been preserved, not by Jason, the heir she once imagined, but by the strength of those who had chosen integrity over greed. And in the quiet of her twilight years, she came to peace with one truth. Scars, whether on the skin or the soul, are not marks of weakness. They are the map of survival. Victoria often told her story not in bitterness, but in warning. "They looked at me," she would say, "and dismissed my words as the ramblings of an old woman. But age doesn't dull the truth. I survived the cold because I refused to surrender. And when the warmth returned, I demanded justice." She would pause, her eyes sweeping the audience, her voice steady. Justice, after all, is best served cold. And now, if you followed Victoria's journey all the way here, the betrayal, the freezer, the trial, the rebuilding, then you've proven something important. You don't just consume stories. You stand with survivors. You recognize strength in scars, courage in the face of betrayal. If Victoria's survival moved you, hit that like button. It tells the world her struggle mattered. Subscribe right now because stories like this, raw, human, unforgettable, deserve to be remembered, and we're only just beginning.